The first sound Cashin Rowe heard wasn't the steady beep of the heart monitor. It wasn't the soft footsteps of nurses changing shifts outside his room. It wasn't the distant announcement echoing through Seattle General Hospital. It was someone crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly enough that every broken piece of him somehow recognized it before his mind did. His eyelids felt impossibly heavy. Every attempt to open them sent a dull ache through his skull. His chest burned each time he inhaled, and an unfamiliar pressure wrapped around his ribs like iron bands. Am I alive? The thought floated through the darkness before anything else. His fingers twitched. A warm hand squeezed them immediately. Oh. The voice trembled. Oh my God. Cashin slowly forced one eye open. Everything was white. White ceiling. White curtains. White fluorescent lights blurred by medication and exhaustion. Then, gradually, one color emerged. Chestnut hair. A faded green sweater. A pair of swollen hazel eyes that looked as though they hadn't slept in days. Saria. She was sitting in the chair beside his hospital bed, one hand wrapped tightly around his while the other covered her trembling mouth. For several seconds neither of them spoke. She simply stared at him. As if she were afraid he might disappear again. A tear rolled down her cheek. Then another. You. She whispered. Her voice cracked before she could finish. You woke up. Cashin wanted to answer. Instead, a painful cough escaped him. Every muscle in his body protested. Within seconds the monitor began beeping faster. Soraya immediately stood. Nurse. She shouted toward the hallway. He's awake. The room suddenly filled with movement. Doctors. Nurses. Questions. Can you hear me? Mr. Rowe, squeeze my hand. Do you know where you are? Can you tell us your name? Cashin answered as best he could. My. His throat felt like sandpaper. My name. He swallowed painfully. Cashin. The doctor smiled. Good. What year is it? He answered correctly. What city are you in? Seattle. What happened? That question lingered longer than the others. His forehead tightened. Rain. Headlights. A scream. Someone standing in the middle of the street. Then. Nothing. His eyes drifted toward Soraya. She had stepped back against the wall, arms wrapped around herself as though trying to keep from falling apart. His voice barely existed. The rain. She closed her eyes. I'm sorry. The words escaped her before anyone could stop them. I'm so. She couldn't continue. A nurse gently rested a hand on her shoulder. The doctor finished his examination before turning toward her. He'll need plenty of rest. Only a few minutes. She nodded immediately. Of course. When the room finally emptied, silence settled between them. Neither knew how to begin. Cashin studied her face. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Hair tied together carelessly. No makeup. The same sweater she'd worn several days earlier. Or had she? He had no sense of time. How? His lips barely moved. Long? 4 days. She answered quietly. You've been unconscious for 4 days. 4 days. It felt impossible. I thought. Her eyes filled again. I thought I lost another person. Cashin frowned. Another? Before he could ask, pain shot through his shoulder. His entire body stiffened. The machine beside him beeped angrily. Easy. Soraya immediately leaned closer. You have 6 broken ribs. Your left shoulder was dislocated. Your right leg has multiple fractures. There was internal bleeding. She stopped herself. You don't need to think about all of it right now. Cashin blinked slowly. He looked at the cast around his leg. The sling supporting his shoulder. The IV lines. The bruises covering his arms. He exhaled painfully. Alive. She laughed through tears. Barely. Another silence. This one softer. Outside the window, Seattle's gray afternoon stretched across the skyline. Rain tapped gently against the glass. The sound made Soraya flinch almost invisibly. Cashin noticed. Even through medication. Even through pain. He struggled to finish the sentence. Never left. She looked down at the hand she was still holding. I kept thinking. If I went home. If I wasn't here. You might wake up alone. Cashin didn't know what to say. Nobody had waited for him in years. Not after his father. Not after his mother. There had been funerals. Condolence cards. Neighbors offering casseroles. Co-workers sending sympathetic emails. Then life had continued. For everyone except him. Yet somehow, this woman, a neighbor who had once been almost a stranger, had spent 4 days sitting beside him. The thought hurt almost as much as his injuries. A doctor returned carrying a clipboard. "We'll be moving Mr. Rowe for another CT scan." Soraya immediately stood. "I'll wait outside." The doctor smiled. "You've already been waiting 4 days. You can wait another 20 minutes. She managed a tiny smile. "I guess I can." As the nurses prepared the bed, Cashin's eyes slowly drifted shut again. Medication pulled him toward sleep. Just before darkness claimed him once more, he felt her squeeze his hand. Not tightly. Just enough for him to know she was still there. And for the first time since losing his parents, Cashin didn't fall asleep feeling alone. 3 months before the hospital room, before the broken ribs and stitched wounds, before the rain changed everything, Cashin Rowe measured time by deadlines rather than memories. Monday meant engineering reports. Tuesday meant virtual meetings with architects in Chicago. Wednesday meant reviewing structural calculations until midnight. Every day looked almost identical. His apartment overlooked downtown Seattle, occupying the 6th floor of a modern condominium where hundreds of people lived side by side while barely knowing one another's names. Packages appeared outside doors. Food deliveries came and went. Elevators carried strangers who stared at their phones instead of making eye contact. Cashin fit perfectly into that quiet anonymity. Working remotely as a civil design consultant, he rarely needed to leave his apartment except for groceries or the occasional site inspection. His laptop sat open on the dining table beside neatly stacked blueprints, engineering manuals, and a coffee mug that seemed permanently half full. The television was almost never on. Music seldom played. Silence had become the soundtrack of his life. Sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, he would instinctively reach for his phone to call his mother before remembering she had been gone for nearly 2 years. The realization never became easier. Grief simply became quieter. Across the hallway lived Soraya Vale. Cashin knew almost nothing about her. She smiled whenever they crossed paths. She always carried reusable grocery bags instead of plastic ones. Fresh flowers seemed to appear in her apartment every week. Some mornings she left before sunrise. Other evenings she didn't return until nearly 9. He guessed she worked long hours. She guessed he worked from home. Neither had ever spoken beyond polite greetings. "Morning. Have a good day. Looks like rain." Seattle conversations rarely needed more. One Thursday afternoon, Cashin left his apartment to collect a package from the lobby. He wore jeans, an old navy sweatshirt, and the expression of someone whose mind was still occupied with bridge load calculations. The elevator doors slid open. Soraya stood inside carrying 2 paper bags filled with groceries. "Oh." She smiled. "Hi." He stepped inside. The doors closed. 6th floor. 5th. 4th. Then. The elevator lurched violently. The lights flickered. Everything stopped. A sharp mechanical groan echoed overhead. For a second neither moved. Then the emergency lights switched on, bathing the small elevator in a dim amber glow. Soraya looked toward the ceiling. "Well." Cashin pressed the open door button. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. "The emergency phone," she suggested. He picked it up. No signal. Only static. A moment later a pre-recorded voice finally answered. "Maintenance has been notified. Please remain calm." The message repeated twice before disconnecting. Cashin seethed. "I guess we're staying here." Soraya let out a tiny laugh. "I've definitely had worse Thursdays." He glanced at her. "You have. I work at a community center." She adjusted one grocery bag before continuing. "I've been bitten by a toddler. Twice." Cashin blinked. "Seriously?" "Oh, absolutely." The second one apologized afterward. He couldn't help it. A small laugh escaped him. It surprised both of them. "There," Soraya said, pointing playfully. "I knew you could smile." "I smile. You tolerate smiling. Different thing." Another silence settled between them. Less awkward this time. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The elevator remained stubbornly still. Cashin checked his watch. Looks like maintenance is taking their time. Maybe they're trapped in another elevator. He looked at her. She grinned. He laughed again. You joke a lot. I work with children. If you lose your sense of humor, you don't survive. She leaned against the wall. What about you? Civil engineer. She nodded thoughtfully. So you're responsible for making sure bridges don't fall down. That's one way to describe it. And buildings? Sometimes. She smiled. So basically you're one of the people quietly holding the world together. He shrugged. I mostly move numbers around. I don't believe that. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. No one had ever described his work that way. What about you? He asked. What exactly do you do? I'm a program coordinator. For Harbor Hope Community Center. We run after-school programs, food assistance, senior outreach, and family counseling. She smiled softly. Mostly I listen. People underestimate how much listening matters. Cashin lowered his eyes. I suppose they do. Another 15 minutes slipped by. The air inside the elevator felt warmer now. Soraya placed the grocery bags on the floor. I hope my ice cream survives this. You bought ice cream? She nodded. Mint chocolate cheap. He made a face. That's controversial. She gasped dramatically. Excuse me. It tastes like toothpaste. That's a terrible opinion. It's the correct opinion. She folded her arms. I no longer trust your engineering judgment. I'll recover somehow. They both laughed. The sound echoed strangely inside the confined space. When the laughter faded, silence returned. This one felt different. Comfortable. Soraya glanced sideways. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you always look? She searched for the right word. Lonely? The question landed gently. Not as criticism. As concern. Cashin stared at the floor. Most people avoided subjects like that. She had walked straight toward it. My parents passed away. The words came quietly. My dad first. My mom less than a year later. Soraya's smile disappeared. I'm so sorry. I don't usually tell people. I'm honored you told me. He nodded. I guess. He hesitated. The apartment got quieter after that. She didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, she simply listened. Exactly as she had described. A minute later she spoke. I used to think silence was peaceful. What changed? I learned silence can also be incredibly loud. He looked toward her. She wasn't looking back. Her eyes remained fixed on the elevator doors. I lost someone too. Her voice almost disappeared. My fiancé. Cashin remained still. He died in a car accident. It was raining. Only those 5 words. No details. No explanation. Yet they carried years of grief. I'm sorry, he said. She smiled sadly. I know. I've gotten very good at hearing those words. For the next several minutes, neither spoke. Oddly, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt shared. 2 strangers standing only a few feet apart, connected by losses they had never expected to reveal inside a broken elevator. Finally, 40 minutes after everything had stopped, a loud metallic thud echoed overhead. The elevator jerked. The lights brightened. A maintenance worker's voice came through the speaker. Sorry about that, folks. We've got you. The doors slowly slid open. Fresh air rushed inside. Soraya picked up her grocery bags. I guess we're free. So it seems. They stepped into the lobby together. Neither moved toward the exit immediately. Instead they stood there awkwardly. As though both sensed that if they simply walked away, something unexpectedly valuable would disappear. Soraya broke the silence first. There's a coffee shop around the corner. The one with the blue awning? Cashin asked. She smiled. You've noticed it. I pass by. But never go inside. Not usually. She tilted her head. You should. He looked at her. Tomorrow morning. The invitation surprised him as much as it surprised her. A slow smile spread across her face. 9. Don't be late. I design buildings. We're obsessed with schedules. She laughed. I'll hold you to that. The following morning, at exactly 8:58 a.m., Cashin walked into the little neighborhood cafe. Soraya was already there. 2 steaming cups rested on the table by the window. You were 2 minutes early, she said. I wanted to prove engineers can be punctual. She slid 1 cup toward him. I took a guess. He lifted it. Black coffee. No sugar. No cream. You guessed right. I had a feeling. Outside, Seattle continued rushing through another ordinary morning. People hurried to work. Buses rolled past. Rain threatened once again. Neither of them knew that a broken elevator had quietly altered the course of two lonely lives. Neither could imagine that one day, months later, one of them would be sitting beside the other's hospital bed, praying for one more chance to hear a heartbeat. Sometimes the most important relationships do not begin with fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes they begin with 40 unexpected minutes between 6 floors, and two strangers who finally stopped pretending they were okay. By the third week, their Friday coffee had quietly become a habit. Neither of them had suggested making it a tradition. It simply happened. At exactly 9 every Friday morning, Cashin would push open the glass door of Harbor Grounds Cafe, and Soraya would already be sitting at the same corner table near the window, a paperback novel resting beside her coffee and a smile appearing the moment she looked up. "You were 30 seconds late," she teased one morning. "I hit every red light. Seattle traffic doesn't believe engineers deserve punctuality. I filed a complaint." "With who?" "The universe." She laughed, a genuine laugh that always seemed to brighten the room more effectively than the morning sun struggling through Seattle's clouds. Cashin found himself waiting for that laugh every week. He never admitted it. Not even to himself. Spring slowly settled over the city. Cherry blossoms colored neighborhood sidewalks. Weekend farmers' markets became crowded again. Children filled nearby parks after months of gray winter weather. For the first time in years, Cashin began noticing the seasons changing instead of simply watching calendar pages disappear. It wasn't because the city had changed. It was because someone kept inviting him outside. "You're spending too much time staring at computer screens." Soraya stood outside his apartment one Saturday afternoon wearing jeans, hiking boots, and a navy rain jacket. He blinked. "How do you know? You've got blueprint ink on your fingers." He looked down. She was right. And she pointed toward the empty coffee mug sitting on the small table inside his apartment. "That's your third cup today. You counted. I observe. I work with children. You learn to notice everything." He sighed dramatically. "So what happens now?" "I'm kidnapping you. I don't think that's legally acceptable. I'm taking you to Discovery Park." He hesitated. "I've got work." "No. I really do." "No, you have excuses." She folded her arms. "Your laptop will survive one afternoon without you." He looked from her determined expression to the untouched hiking trail visible beyond the apartment complex parking lot. Then, unexpectedly, he closed the apartment door behind him. "Fine." She grinned triumphantly. "I knew you'd make the right decision. I've already started regretting it, Leah." The trail wound through towering evergreen trees before opening toward dramatic cliffs overlooking Puget Sound. The salty breeze carried the distant cries of seagulls. Families walked their dogs. Children chased one another across open fields. A young couple took engagement photos near the lighthouse. Cashin noticed everything. Mostly because Soraya insisted on stopping every few minutes. "Look." She pointed toward a tiny hummingbird hovering beside wildflowers. 5 minutes later. "Listen." She closed her eyes. "You can hear waves before you can see them." Another 10 minutes. "Smell that." "The cedar trees." Cashin laughed softly. "I've lived here 8 years. I've never paid attention." "That's because you've been surviving." She looked at him gently. "Not living." The words lingered in the breeze long after she spoke them. Over the following weeks, life quietly rearranged itself. Morning coffee became Tuesday breakfasts. Breakfasts became evening walks. Walks became grocery shopping together because it's more efficient. They attended outdoor concerts in neighborhood parks. Browsed independent bookstores. Argued over which pizza place served the best pepperoni slices. She insisted pineapple belonged on pizza. He claimed it was an architectural failure. "You engineers judge everything. We're trained to identify structural weaknesses. Pineapple isn't a structural weakness. It weakens civilization." She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. An elderly couple sitting nearby smiled at them knowingly. Cashin noticed. He felt strangely embarrassed. Soraya didn't. At Harbor Hope Community Center, everyone knew Soraya. Children ran toward her the moment she walked through the front doors. "Miss Soraya." A little girl wrapped tiny arms around her waist. Another child proudly showed her a drawing covered in glitter. An elderly volunteer waved from the kitchen. Parents greeted her by first name. Cashin stood quietly nearby carrying donated boxes of school supplies. You weren't exaggerating, he whispered. About what? They really love you. Soraya looked around the bustling room. I've been here 7 years. Some of these kids have grown up with me. One teenage boy approached carrying a broken chair. Miss Saraya, I think this one's finally dead. She laughed. I know someone who might disagree. She turned toward Cashin. Engineer? Cashin examined the chair. Give me 15 minutes. The teenager grinned. Seriously? Seriously. Soon Cashin found himself surrounded by curious children watching him tighten screws and reinforce wooden joints. How'd you learn that? One little boy asked. My dad. Cashin answered automatically. The words caught him off guard. He hadn't spoken about his father so naturally in years. Soraya noticed. She didn't say anything. She simply smiled. That evening they locked up the community center together. You looked happy today, Soraya said. I was fixing chairs. You were helping people. They're different. Not always. He considered that. Maybe she was right. Yet despite all the laughter, something remained carefully hidden behind Soraya's eyes. Cashin noticed it gradually. She never drove during heavy rain. Whenever thunderstorms rolled across Seattle, she became unusually quiet. She avoided certain intersections without explanation. Most strangely, she never spoke about the silver engagement ring hanging from a delicate chain around her neck. She wore it every day. Never on her finger. Always close to her heart. One evening, while they watched ferries cross Elliott Bay beneath a fading sunset, Cashin finally asked. Can I ask about the necklace? Her hand instinctively rose to the chain. For a long moment she simply held it. It belonged to Oren. My fiancé. Cashin remained silent. Waiting. Not pushing. He proposed at Mount Rainier. She smiled faintly. He was nervous. So nervous he dropped the ring into the grass. Cashin chuckled. Did he find it? After 20 minutes. We both cried. Her smile slowly faded. 3 months later. She stopped. The breeze carried her unfinished sentence away. You don't have to tell me. I know. She looked toward the water. I'm just. She searched for the words. Not ready. He nodded once. Whenever you are. Nothing more. That was enough. The following month, Harbor Hope announced its annual neighborhood charity festival. Food drives. Free health screenings. Children's games. Fundraising concerts. Local businesses donated supplies while volunteers transformed the parking lot into a celebration for families struggling through difficult times. Soraya looked exhausted reviewing schedules. Cashin walked into her office carrying 2 coffees. You've slept 4 hours. She blinked. How did you know? You sent me an email at 2:17 this morning. She laughed. I forgot about that. He placed the coffee on her desk. You need help. I can't ask. You didn't. I'm volunteering. She smiled. You don't have to. I know. But I want to. For several seconds neither spoke. Some feelings become too large for ordinary conversations. They simply exist. Quietly. Patiently. Waiting. Festival day arrived beneath clear blue skies. Children painted faces. Live music echoed across the neighborhood. Volunteers grilled hamburgers while local firefighters let children climb inside their trucks. Cashin spent the afternoon repairing folding tables, assembling tents, fixing a malfunctioning generator, and helping wherever someone pointed. You've become our unofficial maintenance department, one volunteer joked. I've accepted the promotion. Across the field, Soraya watched him laughing with a group of children trying to build wooden birdhouses. Something warm settled inside her chest. For the first time in years, imagining a future no longer felt like betraying Oren's memory. It simply felt possible. The realization frightened her. And comforted her at the same time. As the festival ended, dark clouds gathered over Seattle with startling speed. A volunteer looked toward the horizon. Storms coming. Within minutes, thunder rolled across the sky. Guests hurried toward parking lots. Children laughed as the first raindrops began falling. Zarya froze. Her smile disappeared. Cashin noticed immediately. You okay? She stared at the rain without answering. Somewhere deep inside, a memory had already begun opening a door she had spent years trying to keep closed. She whispered almost too quietly to hear. Not rain. Then lightning split the evening sky. And for the first time since they had met, Cashin saw pure fear in Soraya's eyes. He had no idea that within minutes, everything would change forever. The first raindrop landed on the back of Soraya's hand. It was cold. Almost gentle. By itself, it meant nothing. A second followed. Then a third. Within moments, the clear June afternoon dissolved beneath dark clouds rolling over Seattle, swallowing the last traces of sunlight. Volunteers hurried across the parking lot, folding tables and carrying donation boxes toward the community center before the storm intensified. Move the sound equipment inside. Someone shouted. Watch the extension cords. Children squealed as parents rushed them toward waiting cars. The joyful festival disappeared in minutes, replaced by organized chaos. Cashin secured the final canopy while rain soaked through his jacket. Across the lot, Soraya stood completely still. She wasn't helping anyone. She wasn't moving at all. She was staring at the rain, as though she no longer saw the parking lot. As though she had been transported somewhere else entirely. Saria? Cashin jogged toward her. She didn't answer. Water collected in her hair, slowly dripping down her face. Her breathing had changed. Short. Uneven. Almost frightened. He stopped beside her. Hey. She blinked once. But her eyes looked through him instead of at him. Another clap of thunder cracked across the sky. Instantly, her shoulders flinched. No. She whispered. Not again. Cashin frowned. What? She wasn't standing in Harbor Hope's parking lot anymore. At least not inside her mind. 5 years earlier, rain had fallen just like this. Relentless. Cold. The windshield wipers on Oren's truck had struggled to keep pace with the storm. She remembered laughing at something he'd said. She remembered answering a text message from work. She remembered telling him, "I'll only be a minute." Then, headlights. A horn. The impossible sound of twisting metal. Glass exploding. Someone screaming. Maybe it had been her. Maybe it had been him. She never knew. The memories always ended there. Leaving only guilt. Endless, crushing guilt. Saria. Cashin's voice broke through the storm. She looked toward him. Except she wasn't really seeing him. Her pupils had widened. Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. I couldn't save him. The words barely escaped her lips. I couldn't. Cashin understood immediately. Not the details. Not yet. But enough. She wasn't afraid of thunderstorms. She was reliving something. We're going inside. He spoke calmly. Come on. He reached for her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. For one brief second, she squeezed his hand back. Then, a volunteer called from across the street. The last supply vans parked over there. We forgot the medical kits. Cashin looked. The van sat on the opposite side of the intersection. If we don't grab them now, they'll get soaked. Another volunteer shouted. I'll help. Cashin answered instinctively. He turned toward Soraya. Stay here. She nodded weakly. Or at least he thought she had. The traffic light changed. Cars slowed. Volunteers hurried across the crosswalk carrying boxes beneath umbrellas. Cashin reached the van and loaded 2 heavy plastic containers into his arms. The rain intensified. Visibility shrank. Wind pushed sheets of water sideways across the road. He glanced toward the community center. Saria was no longer standing where he'd left her. His heartbeat stumbled. Where? Then he saw her. She was walking. Slowly. Mechanically. Toward the crosswalk. Not because the light had changed. Not because she had decided to cross. She was simply following the memory. The rain had pulled her back into the worst day of her life. And her body no longer knew the difference between past and present. Saria. His voice disappeared beneath thunder. She didn't react. 1 foot. Then another. She reached the middle of the intersection. Everything around her faded into echoes. She saw Oren smiling through the windshield. She heard his laugh. She remembered the engagement ring sparkling beneath mountain sunlight. Then, the horn. Long. Violent. Exactly like before. She froze. Completely. At the top of the hill, a delivery truck rounded the corner. Its tires struck standing water. The driver instinctively hit the brakes. The truck didn't stop. Instead, it began sliding. Sideways. The driver gripped the steering wheel desperately. No. He pumped the brakes. The wheels locked. The massive vehicle continued skidding directly toward the intersection. Toward Saria. His horn blared continuously. People on the sidewalk screamed. Move. Lady. Get out of the road. She never heard them. She heard only another horn. 5 years old. Trapped inside her memory. Cashin looked up. Everything slowed. The truck. The rain. The terrified faces. Saraya standing motionless. There wasn't enough time. Not to think. Not to calculate. Engineers loved calculations. There were none to make. Only one decision. He dropped the supply containers. Plastic shattered across the pavement. Then he ran. Later, witnesses would all tell investigators the same thing. They had never seen anyone move so fast. Cashin sprinted through pouring rain, ignoring cars, ignoring shouting, ignoring every instinct telling him to protect himself. His entire world narrowed to one person standing beneath a broken traffic light. Saria. She finally turned. Just enough to see him. Confusion crossed her face. Cashin. He reached her. Wrapped both hands around her shoulders. And shoved her with every ounce of strength left in his body. She stumbled. Fell hard against the wet pavement several feet away. What are you? Her words vanished. Because she finally saw the truck. Time stopped. Cashin looked toward the driver. The driver's eyes were filled with helpless horror. There was nowhere left to go. No space to escape. No miracle waiting. Only impact. His final thought wasn't fear. Oddly. It was relief. She's going to live. The truck struck him with devastating force. The sound echoed across the intersection. His body lifted from the pavement before crashing onto the hood. The windshield exploded into thousands of glittering fragments. Momentum carried him forward. Then he was thrown onto the rain-soaked asphalt nearly 30 feet away. Everything became still. Terribly. Unnaturally. Still. Somebody call 911. People rushed into the street. Traffic stopped in every direction. The truck driver stumbled out, trembling uncontrollably. Oh God. Oh God. I couldn't stop. Saraya slowly pushed herself onto trembling hands. For several seconds she couldn't understand what she was seeing. Cashin lay motionless. Rain pooled beneath him, washing streaks of blood across the pavement. His arm bent at an impossible angle. His leg didn't move. His chest remained frighteningly still. No. She whispered. Then louder. No. She crawled toward him. Ignoring broken glass. Ignoring the rain. Ignoring the people trying to stop her. She reached his side and gently touched his face. Cashin. No response. Cashin. Still nothing. Her hands shook violently. You can't do this. Her voice broke. You can't leave too. A paramedic knelt beside her. Ma'am, I need you to step back. No. He needs me. We're trying to save him. I know. Tears streamed down her face. But he saved me. The paramedic carefully guided her away as another team began chest assessments and stabilized Cashin's neck. One medic counted his pulse. Another started oxygen. A third called out injuries. Possible internal bleeding. Multiple fractures. Blood pressure dropping. Everything happened so quickly. Yet to Saraya, every second lasted forever. She stood in the rain, soaked to the bone, watching strangers fight for the life of the man who had just given everything to save hers. As the ambulance doors closed, one of the paramedics looked at her. Are you family? She hesitated. The truthful answer was simple. No. But her heart refused to say it. Instead, she climbed into the ambulance beside Cashin, took his cold hand in both of hers, and whispered through uncontrollable tears, I'm here. You saved my life. So now. I'm not leaving yours. The ambulance disappeared into the storm, its siren cutting through the rain, while behind it the intersection fell silent, a place that had stolen one love years before and had now nearly stolen another. The first week after Cashin woke from his coma disappeared beneath a haze of pain medication, medical examinations, and interrupted sleep. Every morning began the same way. A nurse checked his vitals. A doctor reviewed scans. Someone asked him to rate his pain on a scale from 1 to 10. He stopped answering with numbers after the third day. It hurts. That became his only response. Because pain no longer fit neatly onto a scale. It lived everywhere. His ribs protested every breath. His left shoulder throbbed whenever he shifted even slightly. His right leg remained locked inside a brace, refusing to obey commands his brain effortlessly sent. The bruises covering his body gradually turned from deep purple to yellow, but the ache beneath them never seemed to fade. Sleep offered little relief. When he closed his eyes, he often heard the truck's horn again. Sometimes he woke before dawn, convinced he was still lying in the middle of that rain-soaked intersection. Every time, Soraya was there. Sometimes asleep in the chair beside him, curled beneath a thin hospital blanket. Sometimes reading quietly by the window. Sometimes simply watching the rain outside, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She always noticed when he woke. "Morning," she would say gently. No dramatic speeches. No forced optimism. Just one simple word. Morning. As though surviving another night was reason enough to begin again. On the 8th day, the orthopedic surgeon entered with a folder tucked beneath his arm. "Good news first," he said. "Your internal injuries are healing better than we expected." Cashin nodded weakly. "And the bad news?" The doctor pulled a chair closer. "Recovery won't be quick." He laid several X-rays across the bedside table. 6 fractured ribs. A reconstructed shoulder. A fractured femur. Torn ligaments. Months of physical therapy. He looked Cashin directly in the eye. "I'm not going to lie to you. The next several months are going to hurt." Cashin stared at the images without speaking. "Will I walk normally again?" "I believe so. But only if you commit completely to rehabilitation." The doctor stood. "The hardest part of surviving an accident," he paused, "is accepting that survival is only the beginning." The following morning, rehabilitation began. A physical therapist named Monica rolled a walker into the room. Cashin looked at it in disbelief. "I can barely sit up." "I know." She smiled kindly. "So today we're only sitting." He frowned. "That's therapy. It is when your body has forgotten how." With Monica supporting one side and Soraya quietly standing on the other, Cashin slowly pushed himself upright. Pain exploded through his ribs. His vision blurred. Every instinct screamed at him to lie back down. Instead, Monica counted softly. 1. "Breathe. 2. You're doing fine. 3. The room tilted. Cold sweat covered his forehead. His hands trembled violently against the mattress. After only 20 seconds, exhaustion overwhelmed him. "I can't." "You can." "I can't." His voice cracked. "I can't breathe." Monica helped him ease back into bed. "That's enough for today." Cashin turned toward the wall. Ashamed. "I lasted 20 seconds. You lasted 20 seconds longer than yesterday." He didn't answer. As the days passed, tiny victories replaced dramatic milestones. He learned to sit without dizziness. Then to stand. Then to shift his weight from one foot to the other. Every movement demanded more determination than he had ever imagined possible. Simple tasks became mountains. Buttoning a shirt. Holding a coffee mug. Brushing his teeth. One afternoon, frustrated beyond reason, he accidentally dropped a plastic cup onto the hospital floor. The loud clatter echoed through the room. He stared at it. Then, without warning, tears filled his eyes. "I can't even hold a cup." Soraya quietly picked it up. She rinsed it, refilled it with water, and placed it gently back into his hand. She never said, "It's okay." She never told him to stay positive. She simply adjusted his grip until he could hold it on his own. Sometimes dignity returned one small gesture at a time. Outside the hospital, life continued. Construction cranes filled Seattle's skyline. New apartment buildings climbed higher. The engineering firm where Cashin worked sent flowers and encouraging emails. His manager, Daniel Brooks, called every Friday. "Take all the time you need. Your projects are covered. We'll be here." Cashin appreciated the kindness. Yet every conversation reminded him that the world kept moving while he remained trapped inside one hospital room. One evening, after hanging up another call, he whispered, "What if I never get back?" Soraya looked up from the novel she had been reading aloud. "Back where?" "My life." She closed the book. "Cashin, I don't even know what my life was anymore." The words lingered between them. "I spent years hiding inside an apartment. Working. Eating alone. Sleeping. Repeating everything. He laughed bitterly. Maybe the accident didn't interrupt my life. Maybe it interrupted my routine. Saria studied him quietly. There is a difference. 3 weeks later, Monica arrived with exciting news. We're taking our first walk today. Cashin glanced toward the walker. I don't think so. You've earned this. I don't want it. She smiled patiently. That's fear talking. No. It's pain. He refused to move. Monica waited. So did Saria. Minutes passed. Finally, Cashin exploded. I said no. His voice startled even himself. I've had enough. I'm tired of people telling me one more step. One more exercise. One more day. His breathing became ragged. I saved someone. I survived. Isn't that enough? Silence swallowed the room. Monica quietly excused herself. I'll come back later. The door clicked shut. Cashin buried his face in his hands. I can't do this anymore. His voice was barely audible. I wake up hurting. I fall asleep hurting. I dream about hurting. I'm exhausted. I don't recognize my own body. He looked toward the window. I wish. He stopped. Saria's expression changed instantly. What? He didn't answer. She stepped closer. What were you going to say? His eyes remained fixed on the rain sliding down the glass. I wish the truck had been just a little faster. The sentence shattered something inside the room. For a long time, Saria couldn't breathe. Then she slowly walked until she stood directly in front of him. She knelt despite the hard hospital floor. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't get to say that. Her voice was quiet. Steady. But stronger than he had ever heard it. He looked at her in surprise. You don't. She reached for both of his hands. They told me you might never wake up. I sat in this room for 4 days. I counted every heartbeat. Every breath. I begged God. I bargained. I promised anything. Her composure finally cracked. And when you opened your eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek. I thought I had been given a miracle. She squeezed his hands. So don't tell me you wish you'd died. Not after fighting this hard. He lowered his head. I don't know how to keep going. I do. She answered immediately. He looked at her. The man who pushed me out of the road. Doesn't get to quit halfway through surviving. The words settled deep inside him. You risked everything because you believed my life mattered. She placed one hand over his heart. So tell me this. When did yours stop mattering? Cashin couldn't answer. Because somewhere beneath the pain. He realized it never had. He had simply forgotten. The next morning, Monica returned. She expected another refusal. Instead, Cashin slowly reached for the walker. His hands still trembled. So, he said quietly, how far are we walking today? Monica smiled. To the window. Only the window. Today. And tomorrow? She grinned. We'll see. Step. Pause. Breathe. Another step. His injured leg shook violently. His shoulder ached. Sweat ran down his forehead. Halfway there, his knees nearly buckled. Saria instinctively reached forward. He looked at her. She didn't hold him up. She simply stayed close enough that he knew she would if he truly fell. That was the difference. She wasn't carrying him anymore. She was reminding him he could still carry himself. Together they reached the window. Seattle stretched beyond the glass beneath another cloudy sky. Cars flowed through busy streets. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Life continued. Cashin rested one trembling hand against the cool glass. For the first time since the accident, he didn't feel like he was watching life happen without him. He felt like he might someday return to it. Behind him, Saria smiled quietly. Neither of them noticed that the rain outside no longer frightened her quite as much. Because this time, someone had stayed. And perhaps that changed everything. By the 6th week, the hospital no longer felt like a place meant only for emergencies. It had become a strange, temporary world with its own rhythm. Cashin knew when the cafeteria began serving breakfast by the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the hallway. He recognized the night nurse's footsteps before she entered the room. He had memorized the changing colors of the sunset reflected in the windows across Elliott Bay. Recovery, he realized, was rarely dramatic. It was repetitive. Pain. Progress. Pain again. Then, almost unnoticed, another small victory. His walker had been replaced by a single cane. His shoulder no longer required a sling. He could walk slowly to the hospital courtyard if someone accompanied him. Those short walks became his favorite part of each day, especially when Soraya came with him. The courtyard sat in the center of the medical campus, surrounded by maple trees and carefully tended flower beds. Patients wandered along paved paths. Some pushed IV poles. Others sat quietly with family members, grateful simply to breathe fresh air. On one cool afternoon, the sky hung low with familiar gray clouds. Seattle threatened rain without quite committing. Cashin lowered himself carefully onto a wooden bench. Soraya handed him a paper cup. Black coffee. He smiled. You remembered. I always remember. She sat beside him. For several minutes, neither spoke. They had grown comfortable with silence. Not the empty silence that had once filled Cashin's apartment. This silence rested gently between them. Like another language. A young boy nearby practiced walking with an artificial leg. Each step looked uncertain. His father walked close enough to catch him if he fell but never reached out first. The boy stumbled. Recovered. Tried again. Cashin watched quietly. He reminds me of you. Saria said. I looked that awkward. You looked more stubborn. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't. They both laughed. The sound faded into the cool afternoon air. When the laughter disappeared, Soraya's fingers drifted unconsciously toward the silver chain around her neck. Cashin noticed. She held the engagement ring for several seconds before speaking. I dreamed about Oren last night. Cashin turned toward her. She rarely mentioned his name. When I woke up. She swallowed. I couldn't tell whether I missed him. Or missed the person I used to be. The confession lingered. She stared across the courtyard where leaves moved gently in the wind. I think. She whispered. I'm finally ready. He understood immediately. Ready to tell him. Everything. It happened 5 years ago. Her voice remained calm. Almost too calm. As calm as someone becomes after telling the same story to themselves thousands of times. She smiled sadly. It was a Saturday. We were supposed to spend the weekend at a cabin near Mount Rainier. She looked down at the coffee warming her hands. Oren had already packed the truck. I was still finishing paperwork for Harbor Hope. Cashin remained silent. She needed space. Not interruptions. I received a phone call from one of the families we worked with. Their little girl had disappeared from a playground. I told Oren. She closed her eyes. Go ahead. I'll meet you there in an hour. Her breathing grew uneven. He kissed my forehead. Said he'd grab groceries on the way. Then he left. She paused. And it started raining. The memory unfolded slowly. Not because she wanted suspense. Because every sentence still hurt. I found the little girl 40 minutes later. She'd wandered into a bookstore. She was perfectly safe. Soraya laughed bitterly. 40 minutes. The amount of time that changed everything. She looked toward the sky. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer because my hands were full. Her voice broke. It was a state trooper. Cashin's chest tightened. He asked. She inhaled shakily. If I knew someone named Oren Mercer. She could still hear the officer's careful tone. Professional. Gentle. Terribly practiced. There had been an accident. A drunk driver crossed the center line. Oren never had a chance. The words finally escaped. And with them came 5 years of restrained tears. She covered her face. I keep thinking. If I hadn't answered that phone call. If I'd left work on time. If I'd been sitting beside him. Maybe we'd have stopped for coffee. Maybe traffic would have been different. Maybe. Her shoulders shook. Maybe he'd still be alive. Cashin listened. Not as an engineer searching for solutions. Not as someone trying to erase her pain. Simply as the friend who had promised, months earlier in a broken elevator, that she could tell him whenever she was ready. She finally lowered her hands. There are nights. She admitted. When I replay every minute. I've memorized weather reports. Police records. The exact time emergency services arrived. I know the names of the paramedics. I know which hospital they took him to. I even know. Her voice became almost inaudible. How long they tried to save him. She looked directly at Cashin. Tell me. What kind of person does that? He answered without hesitation. The kind who loved someone. She blinked. That's all. That's enough. She shook her head. No. The kind of person who couldn't let go. Cashin leaned back against the bench. Can I tell you something? She nodded. The first year after my mom died. He stared at the trees. I stopped using her favorite coffee mug. Soraya frowned. Why? I thought if I used it, I'd eventually break it. So I put it in the cabinet. And left it there. For almost 18 months. He smiled faintly. One day I opened the cabinet and realized something. What? The mug wasn't preserving her memory. It was preserving my fear. Soraya listened quietly. Cashin continued. I think you've been doing the same thing. Not with a coffee mug. With guilt. She looked away. I deserve it. No. I wasn't there. You couldn't have known. I should have gone with him. You also could have been sitting in the passenger seat. She froze. He spoke gently. If that drunk driver crossed the center line, there's every chance both of you would have died. She had never allowed herself to imagine that possibility. Never. Because guilt had always rewritten the story, making survival feel like betrayal. Cashin picked up a small maple leaf that had fallen onto the bench. My parents loved road trips. They died from cancer. I spent years asking myself different questions. What if we'd found another specialist? What if we'd caught it earlier? What if? He looked at the leaf. I eventually learned something engineers understand very well. She smiled weakly. You're about to compare grief to engineering. I am. She laughed through tears. Of course you are. He smiled. When a bridge collapses, we investigate every cause. Materials. Weather. Design. Maintenance. But we don't blame the river. She frowned thoughtfully. What does that mean? It means. He searched carefully for the words. Sometimes tragedy has causes. But not every person touched by that tragedy is one of them. Silence. Long. Meaningful. I blamed myself for Oren. She whispered. And then. She looked at him. I blamed myself for you. Cashin's expression softened. When you were lying unconscious. I kept hearing myself think. If I hadn't invited him to volunteer. If I hadn't frozen. If I had moved. I almost lost you because of me. Cashin slowly reached across the bench. He took her trembling hand. Nah. His voice was barely above a whisper. You almost lost me because a truck hydroplaned. She shook her head. I pushed you into that moment. No. You stood in the road. And I made my own choice. He squeezed her hand gently. I wasn't forced. I wasn't trapped. I chose you. Tears streamed silently down her face. And I choose you again. She stared at him. Not because of the words. But because he spoke them without hesitation. Without regret. For several moments, neither noticed the first light drizzle beginning to fall. Tiny drops landed on the flowers around them. Saria instinctively tensed. Cashin quietly remained seated. He didn't pull her toward the hospital. He didn't tell her not to be afraid. He simply stayed. Beside her. Just as she had stayed beside him. She looked upward. Rain. The same sound. The same sky. Yet something felt different. Not because the memories had disappeared. They hadn't. Oren was still gone. Cashin still walked with a cane. Pain still existed. But she was no longer carrying it alone. She leaned her head gently against Cashin's shoulder. I think. She whispered. I'm tired of punishing myself. He rested his cheek lightly against her hair. Then don't. It won't happen overnight. I know. It might take years. I know. She closed her eyes. Will you stay? Cashin smiled. As long as you'll let me. The drizzle continued. For the first time in 5 years, Soraya didn't run from the rain. She sat quietly beneath it, grieving without drowning. And somewhere deep inside both of them, love stopped feeling like something that had been lost. Instead, it became something patiently waiting to be lived. The morning Cashin was discharged, Seattle welcomed him with pale autumn sunlight. It was the first genuinely clear day he had seen in weeks. The nurses joked that the city itself had decided to celebrate. Cashin wasn't sure about that. He was more concerned with the 3 concrete steps leading from the hospital entrance to the passenger side of Soraya's car. 3 steps. Before the accident, he wouldn't have noticed them. Now they looked enormous. Monica, his physical therapist, stood beside him with folded arms. Remember. No rushing. Plant the cane first. Then your good leg. Then the injured one. Cashin nodded. I know. She smiled. I know you know. But your pride occasionally forgets. Soraya laughed. I've noticed that too. Cashin rolled his eyes. I liked both of you more 5 minutes ago. Carefully, one deliberate movement at a time, he made his way down the steps. His leg ached. His ribs still complained whenever he breathed too deeply. But he reached the car without falling. Monica offered her hand. You've done the hard part. Cashin looked back at the hospital. I don't think I have. She shook her head. No. You've only finished the part where everyone else can help. The next part. She smiled gently. Is learning how to build an ordinary life again. 20 minutes later, Saria parked outside Cashin's apartment building. He stared at the familiar entrance. Nothing had changed. The same brick walls. The same mailbox. The same elevator where everything had quietly begun. Yet it somehow felt unfamiliar. Almost intimidating. What if? He stopped. Soraya looked at him. What if it doesn't feel like home anymore? She smiled softly. Then we'll help it become home again. When the elevator doors opened on the 6th floor, Cashin reached instinctively for the wall. The memories flooded back immediately. 40 minutes. 2 strangers. Mint chocolate chip ice cream. The first genuine laugh he had shared in years. Soraya noticed the faint smile appearing on his face. What? I was remembering. The elevator? He nodded. You still think mint chocolate chip tastes like toothpaste? Absolutely. She gasped dramatically. I spent weeks taking care of you, and somehow your taste in ice cream survived. It was my strongest quality. She laughed. The sound echoed through the hallway exactly as it had months before. Only this time, neither of them was a stranger. Cashin unlocked his apartment door. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Dust floated through thin streams of afternoon sunlight. His favorite armchair remained exactly where he had left it. Engineering journals still covered the coffee table. A half-finished structural sketch lay beneath his laptop. Time had stopped. Or so he thought. Until he looked closer. The apartment smelled different. Fresh bread. Lavender. Clean laundry. Confused, he stepped farther inside. The kitchen counters had been wiped clean. The refrigerator was stocked with groceries. Fresh flowers rested in a glass vase near the window. His favorite coffee beans sat neatly beside the grinder. And on the dining table rested a folded note. He slowly opened it. Only 4 words. One day at a time. He looked toward Soraya. You. She suddenly became very interested in adjusting the strap of her shoulder bag. I had a spare key. You gave it to me after your water heater leaked. I hope you don't mind. Cashin looked around the apartment again. Mind? She had quietly transformed a lonely space into somewhere that felt lived in again. I don't know what to say. You don't have to. She smiled. I figured your first day home shouldn't begin with an empty refrigerator. Recovery outside the hospital proved different from recovery inside it. At home, there were no nurses reminding him when to take medication. No therapists arriving precisely at 9 each morning. No doctors checking his progress. Instead, there were ordinary frustrations. Opening stubborn jars. Carrying laundry. Standing long enough to cook breakfast. Walking downstairs to collect the mail. Every task reminded him that healing was still unfinished. Some afternoons he grew irritated with himself. One Tuesday morning, he struggled for nearly 5 minutes to tie the laces of his right shoe. Finally, he threw the shoe across the living room. I hate this. Soraya, who had stopped by with coffee before work, quietly picked it up. She placed it back in front of him. Then she sat on the floor. Without saying a word, she tied one shoe. Before beginning the second, she looked up. Your turn. He sighed. My fingers still don't cooperate. I know. They'll learn. He stared at the untied lace. Slowly. Awkwardly. Patiently. He finished. Crooked. Loose. Far from perfect. Soraya smiled as though he had accomplished something extraordinary. There. What? You tied your own shoe? He laughed. You're celebrating shoelaces? I'm celebrating effort. As the weeks passed, routines quietly formed. Every Monday morning, Soraya brought coffee before heading to Harbor Hope. Every Wednesday evening, Cashin cooked dinner. At least, he attempted to. His first attempt at homemade chili nearly filled the apartment with smoke. Soraya arrived just in time to hear the smoke detector screaming. She opened every window while laughing so hard she had to lean against the kitchen counter. I followed the recipe. He defended himself. It says medium heat. It didn't say volcanic eruption. I may have misunderstood. She tasted one careful spoonful. She searched for a diplomatic word. Ambitious. So it's terrible. It has personality. It tastes like regret. They ordered pizza. Again. Physical therapy continued 3 times each week. Some sessions ended with triumph. Others ended with frustration. One afternoon, Cashin lost his balance during stair exercises and fell awkwardly onto the padded floor. Embarrassment burned hotter than the pain. Around him, other patients politely pretended not to notice. I should be past this. He muttered. Monica crouched beside him. You know what I saw? What? A man who tried. I saw someone who got back up. Soraya, sitting quietly in the waiting area, caught his eye through the therapy room window. She didn't rush toward him. She simply smiled. The same quiet confidence she had offered from the hospital doorway weeks earlier. He stood. Tried again. Finished the exercise. One rainy Saturday evening, they sat on the apartment balcony wrapped in blankets, watching water streak across the city skyline. Months earlier, rain had meant panic. Now it meant conversation. Soraya held a steaming mug between her hands. I crossed the intersection today. Cashin looked at her. By myself. How was it? I almost turned around. She admitted. But I didn't. He nodded proudly. What made you keep walking? She thought for a moment. I remembered something. What? She smiled. You told me that tragedy has causes. But not everyone touched by it is one of them. He recognized his own words. Hearing them in her voice felt strangely comforting. I've repeated them to myself every day, she confessed. As October settled over Seattle, Cashin gradually returned to work. Not full-time. Just a few hours each day. His manager insisted on a flexible schedule. The first morning he reopened an unfinished bridge design. He stared at the screen for nearly 20 minutes before writing a single note. His confidence had vanished. I don't think I remember how to do this, he admitted during lunch. Soraya smiled. You rebuilt your ability to walk. I think you'll remember engineering. He laughed. When you put it that way, everything else seems manageable. That evening, they walked slowly through their neighborhood. Cashin still carried his cane, though he relied on it less with each passing week. Children played basketball in a nearby driveway. Someone practiced the piano with an open window. The scent of fresh bread drifted from the bakery on the corner. Nothing extraordinary happened. No dramatic confession. No passionate kiss beneath autumn leaves. Just 2 people walking side by side. Their shoulders brushed occasionally. Neither moved away. When they reached the apartment building, Soraya started toward her own door across the hallway. Then she paused. She looked back. Good night, Cashin. Good night. She smiled. I'm proud of you. He watched her disappear inside her apartment. Only after her door closed did he notice the note she had quietly slipped beneath his own. He picked it up. The handwriting was familiar. Healing isn't measured by the days when nothing hurts. It's measured by the days when hope hurts less than yesterday. He folded the note carefully and placed it inside the same drawer where he once kept old family photographs. Not because he wanted to hide it. Because he wanted to keep it. Some people leave behind expensive gifts. Others leave behind unforgettable words. Soraya had spent months leaving behind pieces of hope, one ordinary day at a time. And without either of them ever saying the words aloud, something undeniable had taken root between them. It wasn't built on grand romantic gestures. It had grown through shared coffee, physical therapy appointments, grocery lists, rainy evenings, quiet laughter, and the simple promise that neither would have to face tomorrow alone. Sometimes love arrived so quietly that it sounded exactly like everyday life. 6 months passed quietly. Not because life became perfect. Because healing rarely announced itself. It arrived unnoticed. One ordinary morning, Cashin realized he had climbed the apartment stairs without counting each step. Another afternoon, Soraya drove through downtown during a light rain before recognizing she had made the entire trip without pulling over to catch her breath. Neither victory appeared on social media. No one applauded. Yet they were the kinds of triumphs that quietly reshaped a life. Seattle welcomed spring once more. Cherry blossoms returned to neighborhood sidewalks. The mornings grew brighter. People lingered longer in parks and sidewalk cafes. Harbor Hope Community Center prepared for its annual Neighborhood Volunteer Day. This time, however, Cashin wasn't arriving as a visitor. He had become one of the volunteers. Children spotted him before he reached the entrance. "Mr. Cashin." A little boy ran toward him carrying a wooden birdhouse. The roof fell off again. Cashin laughed. "I thought we built this to survive an earthquake." "We did. So what happened?" The boy shrugged innocently. "My little sister happened." "I was afraid you'd say that." The children gathered around him almost immediately, placing broken toys, loose chair legs, and wobbly bookshelves in front of their unofficial engineer. Saraya watched from across the room while organizing food donations. One of the older volunteers leaned beside her. "I've never seen him smile this much." Neither had she. The community center buzzed with familiar energy. Parents sorted canned goods. Teenagers painted classroom walls. Retired carpenters repaired playground equipment. Cashin spent most of the afternoon teaching several middle school students how to safely use measuring tape, wood glue, and screwdrivers. "Measure twice," he reminded them. "Cut once." One teenage volunteer grinned. "You say that every 5 minutes. Because you'll remember it for the next 50 years. Laughter echoed through the workshop. Saraya paused in the doorway. She didn't interrupt. She simply watched. Months earlier, Cashin had believed his life consisted only of engineering reports and lonely evenings. Now he was patiently helping children discover confidence in their own hands. Healing, she realized, had changed far more than his body. It had changed his heart. As the afternoon came to an end, the executive director gathered every volunteer for a group photograph. "Everybody closer. Don't hide in the back." Cashin instinctively stepped aside. He had always disliked photographs. Saraya noticed. Without saying anything, she reached for his hand beneath the crowd. Just briefly. Just enough. He looked down. Then back at her. She smiled. "Come here. You belong in this one." He joined the group. The camera flashed. For the first time in years, Cashin didn't wonder whether he looked happy. He simply was. After everyone left, they remained behind to lock the building together. The classrooms stood quiet again. Sunlight stretched across polished wooden floors. Cashin carefully repaired the same old chair he had fixed during his first visit months earlier. Saraya laughed. "You know, I think that chair likes breaking. It enjoys attention. You sound emotionally invested. I've spent enough time with it." She smiled. "Thank you." He looked up. "For what?" "For saying yes that first day." "The festival?" "The elevator." She corrected gently. "If you hadn't agreed to coffee, none of this would have happened." Cashin considered her words. "Maybe. But you invited me. And you came." He smiled. "I almost didn't." She blinked. "What?" "I stood outside the cafe for 5 minutes. I almost walked away." She stared at him in disbelief. "Why?" "I thought." He laughed softly at himself. "That maybe you were just being polite." Her eyes widened. "I thought you were going to cancel." For several seconds they simply looked at one another. Then both burst into laughter. All those months. All that fear. All because two lonely people had assumed they weren't worth choosing. On the drive home, Cashin turned unexpectedly at a familiar intersection. Saraya recognized it immediately. Her smile disappeared. "This isn't the way home." "I know." He parked along the curb. For a moment neither reached for the door. The intersection looked ordinary now. Traffic lights changed calmly from green to yellow. Families crossed with strollers. Cyclists waited patiently at the corner. Nothing suggested that months earlier the street had been filled with shattered glass, flashing ambulance lights, and desperate prayers. "You don't have to," Cashin said quietly. "If you're not ready." Saraya looked through the windshield. "I think." She took a slow breath. "I am." They crossed the street together. Neither hurried. When they reached the center of the crosswalk, both stopped. The afternoon sun warmed the pavement. No rain. No thunder. Only blue sky stretching endlessly above Seattle. Cashin looked around. "It's smaller than I remembered." She nodded. "Trauma makes places feel enormous." For several minutes they remained silent. The city moved around them without noticing. Office workers hurried home. School buses rolled past. Someone laughed from a nearby cafe patio. Life had continued. Exactly as it always does. Soraya slowly turned toward the place where Cashin had fallen. I used to think this intersection ruined my life. She whispered. Cashin followed her gaze. And now? She smiled through tears. I think it gave me a second one. He felt his throat tighten. If you hadn't pushed me, I would have died. If you had died. She looked at him. I would have spent the rest of my life believing I destroyed everyone I loved. He shook his head gently. You didn't. I know. The words came without hesitation. I finally know. Cashin reached into his jacket pocket. He unfolded a small piece of paper. The edges had become soft from months of being carried everywhere. Soraya recognized it immediately. One day at a time. She smiled. You kept it. Every day. When therapy hurt. When I couldn't sleep. When I was afraid I'd never work again. I read this. He looked at the faded handwriting. It reminded me that healing wasn't supposed to happen all at once. She blinked back tears. I wrote that in 30 seconds. It changed my life. A gentle breeze carried fallen cherry blossom petals across the intersection. One landed near Cashin's shoe. He bent carefully, picked it up, and smiled. You know, he said. I've been thinking about something. What? The first thing I heard after waking up wasn't the heart monitor. She nodded. It was you crying. She laughed quietly. I was trying not to wake the whole hospital. I'm glad you failed. She looked at him curiously. Why? Because I realized something later. He took her hand. I thought I saved your life that day. She squeezed his fingers. You did. He shook his head. No. I only saved your heartbeat. He looked directly into her eyes. You saved everything that came afterward. For a long moment, neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. The truth had already found them. Several years later, Cashin would often think back to that hospital room. People occasionally asked about the faint scars running along his shoulder or the slight stiffness that still appeared during cold mornings. He never told them about the pain first. He told them about the woman sitting beside his hospital bed. About 40 unexpected minutes inside a broken elevator. About black coffee every Friday morning. About community center children who taught him that broken things could still be useful. About rainy afternoons that no longer inspired fear. About handwritten notes folded inside a drawer. About countless ordinary days that quietly became extraordinary simply because someone chose to stay. He eventually understood something that no engineering textbook had ever taught him. Buildings were not the strongest structures people could create. Trust was. Hope was. Love was. Not the loud, dramatic kind celebrated in movies. But the kind that waited beside hospital beds. The kind that tied nooses of despair into lifelines of courage. The kind that made coffee before sunrise, stocked refrigerators without being asked, listened without trying to fix everything, and remained present long after everyone else had returned to their own lives. Years after the accident, Cashin and Soraya would still pass that intersection from time to time. Neither avoided looking at it anymore. It had become more than the place where a truck nearly ended one life. It had become the place where two wounded souls unknowingly chose each other. Not through promises. Not through perfect circumstances. But through sacrifice. Through forgiveness. Through showing up, day after day, when leaving would have been easier. As they walked home beneath a sky as blue as hope itself, their hands remained intertwined. No grand speeches. No audience. Only two ordinary people carrying extraordinary scars. And somehow, those scars no longer represented everything they had lost. They had become proof of everything they had survived. Because sometimes the greatest miracle is not surviving the darkest day of your life. Sometimes it is discovering that, when the darkness finally passes, someone is still standing beside you. Waiting. Smiling. Ready to walk the rest of the journey with you.